going to introduce Colin, Barrett, and Wendy Erskine, and then I think they'll read for us. And yeah. So this is Colin Barrett. Colin Barrett is a writer from Mayo. His first story collection, Young Skins, published by The Stinging Fly and Jonathan Cape, won the 2014 Guardian First Book Award, the 2014 Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, and the Rooney Prize for Literature. His work has been published in The Stinging Fly, Granta, Harper's, and The New Yorker. His latest collection, Homesickness, has been recently published to rave reviews. The Financial Times said this is a beautiful and moving collection from one of the best story writers in the English language today. Anne Enright in The Guardian said, Barrett is already one of the leading writers of the Irish short story, which is to braggingly say, one of the leading writers of the short story anywhere. So welcome, Colin. Is that good? A good introduction?
Lovely, yeah.
It's nice when you have to sit there. People talk about you like you're not there. Wendy Erskine lives in Belfast. Sweet Home, her first collection of stories published by The Stinging Fly and Picador, was shortlisted for the Edge Hill Prize and the Republic of Consciousness Prize. It was longlisted for the Gordon Byrne and won the 2020 Butler Literary Award. Her work has been published in The Stinging Fly, Tangerine Press, No Alibis Press, and Rough Trade Books. Her latest collection, Dance Move, has been widely celebrated. The Observer described the stories in Dance Move as daring, funny, heartbreaking, and like everything else here, out-and-out entertainment, not to be missed. Kevin Barry described Wendy's work as spiky and funny, dark and stylish. Wendy Erskine is a natural-born storyteller. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Yes, it's great that what we have in common is all three of us were published by The Stinging Fly, and everyone keeps asking us where our novels are, so that's nice. Would you like to read, Colin?
Sure, yeah. Go on, no problem. Yeah, so I'll just read the opening few pages of a story in the collection called The Alps. The Alps, and it's about three brothers going to the pub, and by the excerpt, they might just make it into the pub by then, but anyway. So I'll read for a few pages. So this is The Alps. A Hitachi Hi-Ace with piebald panelling, singing suspension and reg from the last millennium, rolled into the car park of the Swinford Gales Football Club late on a Friday evening. The Hi-Ace belonged to Rory Hughes, the eldest of the three brothers known as the Alps, and the Alps travelled everywhere together in it. The brothers stepped out and, with a decisive slam of the van's side door, moved off across the moonscape of the car park, in the order of their conceptions, Rory on point, the middle brother Eustace close behind, and the youngest, Bimbo, in dawdling tow. The Alps, weary after a week of work, did not speak. They listened to the chunked slippage of the gravel under their work boots. On the floodlit pitch, a pheasant groomed itself beneath the sagging diagonals of the goal-mouth netting. The night air was close and cloudless, sultry with the stink of silage coming off the surrounding fields. Asleep almost on his feet, Bimbo noticed a light moving up in the sky, a shining point, minuscule as a star or a transatlantic plane, but moving far too nimbly and erratically to be either. Bimbo roused. He watched the point descend at an angle, shoot back up at 90 degrees, then stop and wobble in place. A spaceship, Bimbo fancifully thought, for the point's motion, however clumsy, seemed purposeful. Then Bimbo noted the patch of land. The pip of light was bobbing above and figured it out. See that, he said. Huh? Grunted Eustace. What I'm looking at, said Bimbo. His older brothers turned to Bimbo, then faced back in the direction he was looking. Which would be, said Rory. See, said Bimbo, focusing his attention on the point, as if by telepathy the older two duly clocked the light. What in the Christ is that when it's at home, said Rory. It's a drone, said Bimbo. Them acres over there belong to Marcus Landry, right? I heard he was sourcing the highest spec drones he could get his hands on to keep track of his herds. He's rakes of livestock and animals, and they do be regularly going missing on him, Bimbo said. The surmise is some intrepid bollocks is poaching them. That would be the surmise, all right, said Rory. Drones, said Eustace. Would you be well? Landry is a man of means, said Rory. Men of means are rarely right in the head. Drone surveillance, said Bimbo. I think it's class. The Alps were shortish men with massive arses and brutally capable forearms. They breathed coltishly through their noses and rolled their shoulders with a circumspect flourish whenever women crossed their paths. They billed themselves as tradesmen, though between them they had never acquired a qualification in any particular trade. What they did was try things at a competitive rate. They painted, wired, plumbed, tiled, but where they excelled was in the displacement of the earth, digging holes, filling holes back in, holes of any circumference and depth, Holes were their forte. Bimbo had just turned 37, Rory and Eustace were coming up on 50. The Alps still felt young in their souls, but it was the bloodshot eyes, pouched necks, and capitulating hairlines of middle age that leered back at them from mirrors. They ate too much takeaway, slept fitfully, downed vats of Guinness every weekend. In addition to their remorseless lifestyle, there was the disgraceful odds offered by their genes. The Alp family tree was a stump mutilated by cancer and coronaries. Few of their male forebears had made it into their 60s, which meant the Alps' days were probably almost over. The Alps carried this knowledge around with them, because what else could they do but carry it? They were gleeful, boisterous, and deprecating in company, except when they weren't. Then it was like a switch got switched. It was not true to say any of them had a temper, only that they possessed a reserve of a certain kind of energy, an energy that periodically required venting. Fights happened and they got in them. The outcomes, generally in their favor, were nonetheless irrelevant. The Alps were built for punishment. They were not built to last. The brothers came through the clubhouse door to a mild effusion of hollers and hellos from the handful of patrons already ensconced. There was the teenage barman Mikey Riley with his pink cheeks and sawdust crew cut. There was Softly Brohan, recently retired half-forward for the county senior football team, dubbed Softly for his loping running style and ability to ghost between the opposition lines. Softly now managed his father's haulage company out of Westport. He was a vivid dresser and was tonight arrayed in a baronial waistcoat with a fob pocket watch, a cornflower neckerchief, and a champagne bomber jacket of distressed leather. On the arm of Softly was not his fiancée, the solicitor, Stella McAlendon, but one of Stella's younger sisters, Denise, a primary school teacher and finalist in the 2014 Mayo Rosa Tralee Heats. The pensioner Paddy Ginty was there with the tank of purified oxygen snugged into the tartan trolley bag. He was obliged to wheel around with him everywhere, and his scowling daughter Moira, herself in her 50s, in the leather jacket and narrow black clerical trousers she favoured, the dark glasses she never took off on account of her chronic photophobia. Anyone clap eyes on that peacock outside beyond the goals, Bimbo said. I did not, Softly said, but in any case, I'd wager that would very much be a pheasant you were looking at, Bimbo. Bimbo looked Softly up and down. You look like Kanye, kid, Bimbo said. Kid, I am Kanye, Softly said. Rory and Eustace slid onto a pair of stools in front of the taps. How's the form, Mikey? Rory said. The form remains legendary, Mikey said, already working on their Guinnesses. A round of cheese toasties as well, Rory said. We're running on fumes here. Onions and mustard, Mikey asked. Load them beasts up, Rory said, and 3 packages of tato while you're at it. Mikey turned to the shelves behind him, and the brothers regarded his neck, bright pink, savagely sunburnt. That's an awful scalded neck you have on you there, Mikey, Eustace said. I was up on the roof of the mother's house listening to an MMA podcast this afternoon, and did I only fall asleep, Mikey said. Gutted for you, Rory said. Bimbo remained on his feet. He paced around the lounge, brooded at the burgundy carpet with its pattern of custard-coloured spades like the spades on playing cards, his hands dangling at his sides, limp as strangled game. He was antsy now because of the presence of Denise McAlendon. He could not remove her from his peripheral vision, nor did he want to. Her skin was an improbably deep and even brown, and she was in jeans and heels, and she smelled absolutely unreal. She was one of them ones who was already beautiful, but troweled on the cosmetics anyway. And while there was a certain type of man who claimed he preferred natural-looking women, Bimbo did not see how you could mind either way. The Alps were not men comfortably acquainted with the carnal, but they could become as fissured and rent with yearning as anyone. Thank you.
That was really good. I totally forgot where I was there, what I was supposed to be doing. Wendy, would you like to read something?
I'll read a little bit, yes, thanks very much. I'm going to read a little bit of a story called Gloria and Max. Years and years and years ago, I once got a lift to, it was actually a Christian film festival, and I got a lift with a guy I'd never met before, and he was a Pasolini expert, and he was totally bemused by the idea of a Christian film festival. He'd come over to work in Belfast, and this guy was from such another world. He'd never had wagon wheel biscuits before, so I was able to tell him all about wagon wheels. And this story is about 2 people on their way to a Christian film festival. But I'm not the woman, Gloria, and the guy I'm talking about wasn't Max. So I'll just read you the first few pages of this. Max Haynes had been in Northern Ireland for just under 2 months, long enough to know its limitations. Those presented themselves within 2 days, such as the cultural quarter of Belfast that consisted of a single street. He was there as visiting professor of film, and now he was in his car, driving to a place in the middle of nowhere. There was to be a film festival in some godforsaken spot, and he'd been roped into attending a planning meeting. Yeah, for sure, he could appreciate the importance of an outreach dimension to the work of the faculty. He had, in fact, already programmed a short unknown pleasure series for the university cinema based on Slavic mythology. And as far as he was concerned, it had been quite a success. Yet the prospect of this small local festival filled him with little enthusiasm. Indeed, it presented significant ideological and aesthetic issues because, as a festival of so-called Christian cinema, it was monocultural and reductive. But nonetheless, Max had agreed to go. And he had also said that he would give a lift to another attendee, a woman called Gloria, who would be waiting outside the Spar in one of the unfortunate little places he had to pass through. Max arrived at the designated place at the agreed time. It was not a particularly attractive spot, although it felt rural. The huge chimney of a nearby power station loomed through the trees. In this main street, he wondered if people were waiting for some kind of drugs drop. Such were the numbers loitering. 3 teenage guys were taking turns to jump on the silver inflatable from the inside of a wine box. Behind them was a sign advertising hot food. A burrito wore a sombrero and had a moustache. That was fairly typical of the place. He would hesitate to brand everyone in the country rednecks because many weren't. Max had met several people at the university that he would certainly keep in touch with after he left at the end of the year. And there was a guy and his partner who did film scores, but undoubtedly there were also a lot of rednecks. At the bus stop in front of the shop, a crowd of girls waited. One of the boys kicked the burrito sign. On the other side of the street, there was a funeral director's with an outsized drum clock above the window, its slow hand performing its sweep. Max cringed at the clumsiness. And then, turning back, he saw a heavy-set, middle-aged woman in jeans, white trainers, and a pale pink anorak. She had patchy, short blonde hair and looked entirely unperturbed as she stood against the front of the shop. Max wondered how this woman might feel about being in a car, an enclosed space, with a man she didn't know. It might make her feel less uneasy if he banged on a bit about Janica. That would establish that he wasn't a threat, and that Janica was a person who, if not there in physical manifestation, was constantly there in thought. Max rolled down the window. "Gloria," he said, not loud enough. "Gloria," he shouted. It sounded ridiculous, like some kind of dreadful Van Morrison tribute act. "Gloria." The woman looked over, unconcerned, and then walked towards the car. "Hi," he said, once she got in beside him. "I'm Max, and even though I have no idea how to get to this place, I've got the sat-nav to help us." "It's a straight road," Gloria said, "to get there." "That's good to know," Max said, but he kept the sat-nav on. "So," Max said, "here we are on our way to this planning meeting. You're very interested in film." Gloria considered this and then said, "Well, I watch a few things on the telly, now and then." "Well, film's actually what I'm involved in," Max said. "You make films?" "No, I teach at the university." "Oh," she said. "I'm a film academic." "Huh? Film academic, teaching the people about films." "Yeah, how to make films." "No, how to watch them." "Lesson 1, how to turn on the TV," she said, looking out the window of the car. "I've just moved to Belfast," Max began, But actually, my partner is still in London. Well, she's from Finland originally, but she's in London. Okay, Gloria said. Yes, said Max, she's called Janica. The distance makes no difference, really. Not that we're really so very far away from each other. Not really. Belfast and London, we're, very in love. Gloria rearranged the hood of her anorak where it got caught in the seatbelt. Okay, said Gloria. So, what's your involvement then with this festival? Max asked. Mr. Anderson said for me to go, she replied. Mr. Anderson's the boss of my place. He's the boss of all the homes. They're going to be bringing all the old people from the homes to see the films. That's going to be some job, she added. And what type of films do you expect that the old people will like? Old ones, Gloria said. The cars flashed by in the other lane. There was a buzz in the car from a fly. It crawled along the dashboard and then flew off to land again on the dashboard. Where is the home where you work then? Max asked. On the way out of Carrick, she said. Max smiled. Well, that's dependent really on which way you come into Carrick, isn't it? Gloria paused. If you don't know whether you're coming in or out of Carrick, there's not a lot of hope for you, she said. The smell of her was in the car, despite its newness and the air conditioning. He couldn't place it. An astringent lemon like a shower gel, but also something else like dogs. He could imagine her walking a couple of muscle terriers early in the morning. He looked across and saw the nails cut short, the weathered hands. And do you not drive, Gloria? He asked. I do, she said, but Billy takes the car. That's your partner. Husband. Billy takes the car. Billy has the prerogative to take the car. He needs it to get to work, she said. And when do you go out in the car? When he doesn't need it to get to work. When Max had been young, they'd had a woman who came to tidy up, not a cleaner. There was a certain insouciance to tidying up. It suggested sorting books into piles, folding some newspapers, and she did that too. But it probably didn't give a sense of mopping dirt, which was what she also did. One week she didn't arrive, and then the next, when she did, she was apologetic, the side of her face pale, yellow and green. His mother had given her an address and a purse full of money, but the woman left the purse on the little table beside the door. 2 weeks later, she didn't turn up again, and they had to let her go because they needed somebody reliable. Max thought he wouldn't inquire any further about Gloria's husband, Billy. A lorry overtook them, sending pieces of stone up to hit the windscreen. Max turned on the radio. 2 men were talking about emerging financial markets in the Far East. How do you feel, Max said, batting at the fly, about this being a specifically Christian film festival? Gloria shrugged. Old people wouldn't want smut, she said. It's either smut or Christian, do you think? Max asked. There was talk of them showing the film about the runners, Gloria said. Chariots of fire. The fella doesn't want to run on a Sunday, and so he doesn't run on a Sunday. Most places are open now on a Sunday, she went on. Wonder what he'd think of that. Not much. Me and my friend, she said. Me and my friend worked in a video shop on the Shore Road, and I would keep her company. Derelict now, but it's one of the fake shops. Got the hoardings up to take the bad look off it. They've made it look like it's a shoe shop. Haven't noticed places like that? Well, they're everywhere, well. The sat-nav was showing Max that he needed to make a left turn. He slowed down in anticipation, put on the indicator. No, said Gloria, that's not the way. That's where I'm being told to go. Not the way. But, she said, it's up to you. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
That was great, Wendy. I really enjoyed that, and it's nice because I don't have to do anything when you read. I just want to ask you both about writing dialogue. Like I feel from both those pieces that you read that you're both so good at writing dialogue. I was just wondering how you approach it. specifically?
Ask me first.
You go ahead, Colin.
Okay. I never really put much thought into dialogue, which sounds like a, I don't know, annoying answer.
It is.
Implying an ability, you know, because I sweat so much over all the writing, but I always used to be really, you know, it was the sort of the dialogue was almost like the pressure release. I could just have fun. When I was, you know, the rest of the time you're like digging a hole. You just, you know, you're just working away at trying to get the sentences down and have them flow and have the right register for the you know, for the non-dialogue, the prose. And so dialogue was always a release. But then as I kind of, you know, went along, I mean, people would say, "Oh, your dialogue's good." And I was like, "Oh, great." And but as I went along, I realized that that's actually, you know, the pressure release, but it's where the characters come out. The rest of it's just sort of setting it up and setting up the scenario, and they really come alive then when they start speaking. And they can, you know, they can say anything, and they can say what they don't mean, and they can, you know, and all that stuff's there, and that's, you know, people understand that just from, you know, from their everyday life. So it's a really wonderful. I went from kind of it being almost an afterthought in my earliest days of writing to, you know, just realizing how rich a tool it is to get across a sense of character without having to sort of, like, you know, dissect them. You can just, the dialogue just goes out and flows.
Yeah, that's very clear, yeah. What about you, Wendy?
Yeah, I love writing dialogue, and I do spend quite a lot of time trying to get it right. And so I'll sit there going, you know, would you give me that? Are you going to give me that? Would you give me that, please? Are you going to give me that? You know, to try to work out what works, you know. And it's just what Colin's saying. It's just such a way of getting across the character without having to explain it too much to a reader, you know. So I just think people just in everyday life are just very, very skilled, adept at interpreting the way people speak. You know, when somebody says to you, "I'm honestly not bothered, I'm really not bothered," you're like, "Oh, you're bothered," you know. So everybody knows how there's the surface level, but then there's the alternative meaning, and you know, I'm just kind of quite alert to that whenever people are talking in real life. And you know, one of my favourite things was a time whenever I was in a shopping centre and there was a wee kid in front of me and on a really cute cardigan of a sort of handmade type that you wouldn't see nowadays. And I actually said to the mum, "It's a lovely cardigan. Where did you get that?" And she said, "Oh, her other granny knitted that." Right? And in that little phrase, "her other granny knitted that," you've got an entire family dynamic in just a couple of words. So I think there's just so much kind of complexity and nuance and suggestion that you can build into dialogue, and also as well, it can just be very funny. You know, people are funny whenever they're speaking too.
I think in stories in particular, it's very important to have dialogue, because you don't, you know, otherwise you don't have a lot to work with. You're not telling the whole, you're only getting a glimpse of characters, and you're not telling their whole life. So I find dialogue is very, very important to just crystallize, get us, as Wendy says, you're just getting, the whole story's there. It's in that throwaway phrase. And I think readers enjoy, I enjoy when I'm reading. I don't want to be told everything that's going on inside their head, no matter how eloquently it's put. I do enjoy the fact that you're coming up, like in real life, there's a face in front of you, and it's got an expression, and it's got a vibe, but then you have to pay attention to the words coming out of it, and how, you know, how strange that often is to negotiate that, even though we do it every day. So I find it's very, you know, I can't even think of any stories that aren't dialogue heavy, but I know lots of certain novelists and stuff would writing very interior books. But I find, even though the short story is a kind of interior form in many ways, having multiple characters and having them talk just brings it alive in a way for me all the time. Like, it's so integral to how I structure a story, never mind write it. Yeah.
That thing you were saying there, Colin, about, you know, elegantly expressed, you know, thoughts. Like, I'm not interested at all in writing dialogue, this epigrammatic, that writing dialogue where people are speaking in semicolons, or where people are incredibly articulate and are voicing their emotions with great precision. So I suppose you've got a continuum from, you know, people that have this highly stylized reviewer of dialogue, where you marvel at the wit of the people that are speaking, and then you've got the other end where it's moving sort of James Cameron-esque or whatever, where it's dialogue with loads and loads of non-fluency features. And I'm moving more that end than wanting dialogue that is super epigrammatic. But that's just a taste thing. I also like reading. I like reading stuff that's not like me a lot of the time. But I'm trying to mess up the dialogue as much as I can without it starting to get annoying for people. So they'll repeat the same word. The sentence won't be constructed in any kind of usual way. But that's part of the plan.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great answers. I also wanted to ask you both about, because these are your second collection stories, the difference between writing your first collection and writing your second.
Good God.
I told you I was serious about this, Colin.
I mean, it's been 7 years since my first book came out, and I mean, but the same way I wrote the stories in the first collection, I don't really worry about them, how they will fit into an overall collection. Each story is just a story when I'm writing it, and these were written over, the oldest one is, I think, from 2015 maybe, you know, and the newest ones were a couple in 2020, like late, you know, in 2020. So it was written, you know, this book was written over 5 years, really, in that sense. And, you know, I kind of, and you trust in I can't plan anything. And if I do plan it, it all falls catastrophically around my ears. So I just worked on the stories, and, you know, I picked, when it came time to put the collection together, I just found some that did seem to sort of, in a very just intuitive, subjective sense to me. I don't know if anyone gets it, but they seem to have a thematic concern, and they're all rooted, most of them, in the west of Ireland, where I'm from, as my first collection was. But the stories all had and this just happened. I wasn't going in thinking about it, but they had a more porous and precarious attitude to the concept of home and the characters' orientation to home, to where they were from. That seemed different from the first book, and I hope that's apparent. But, you know, I don't go in with some overarching theme or concept that I want to unify the stories. It really is just, you write the stories, get them as good as you can, and then when the time comes, if you're lucky enough to get to put them in the book, try and put them side by side and have them at night. But there's no obligation. The reader can read them in whatever order they want, or they can just read a couple and whatever. So I found it was just another pleasurably incremental process. You know, I didn't mind it taking a while to come together, and just taking each story as it comes. Really, that was, you know, God, you know.
That's all you can do.
No point planning because I can't do it. So. Yeah.
How about you, Wendy? Any difference did you feel from the
Well,
first?
kind of joked about this new collection and said that I was going to aim for more sex, more commas, and that's true. There are more both of those things, but I suppose, you know, after I'd finished the first collection, I hadn't really any. I kind of fell into writing, I suppose you would say, you know, and I hadn't really any great strategic plan for what I was going to do next. And I really enjoy writing stories, and so that's just what I continued doing. And then Declan Mead from Stinging Fly said, "Would you like to do another collection of stories?" And I thought, well, yes, I would. So I suppose I suppose what you get from a writer is a sensibility. You get a way of looking at the world. You get a way of seeing people or seeing certain aspects of life. And I suppose there's a kind of continuity between the first book and the second in terms of that, you know. And the same as Colin, really, in the sense that it's just trying to make each story individually as good as it can be, and a sort of a cohesive, interesting whole, rather than thinking of anything beyond that, you know. So that was the way I worked.
Were they all written after? Sorry,
Go ahead, do my job.
were these all written after the stories in Sweet Home, or
No,
just some of them overlap?
Colin, they actually
you know?
weren't. So one of them, Sail, the longest one, it was due to be in Sweet Home, and it was one I actually kept back from Sweet Home because I kind of thought it was really long already, and it was kind of quite a complex story, and I really enjoyed writing it, and I kind of thought to myself, I wonder if that's actually a novel, because there were so many different characters that were only being mentioned, but I kind of thought it's interesting. Their stories could be interesting. And then I spent some time working on it, and then thought, you know what? I've already told this as a story, short story.
Yeah.
Why do I want to make it a novel? So there was that one, and then there were the couple that were on the radio, and sort of concurrent with, I think, the first collection, and then the rest of them were new. Yeah.
Did you find, because you wrote this is your second book, did your relationship to your writing change after seeing like a public reaction to it, or having an audience, or having more of an audience?
It's great to get attention and all that. You can't say it's not, and it's great if it's positive, obviously. Yeah. But like that goes away after a while, you know. And so I mean, I probably only wrote. The earliest story was probably written a good. Like I probably began it at least 6 or 7 months after Young Skins had come out, so it had gone through the initial wave of all that stuff. And you know, the reality is, you kind of forget what anyone said. You know, I'll read reviews and I'll read all that, any stuff about it, but I kind of only read it once, no matter how good or not it is, and then I just genuinely kind of forget what it said. But so, yeah. What was the question?
Can't remember.
Did it affect? Yeah, did it affect? No, it's just again, it's just like, I mean, it sounds like a, you know, like a lie, but like it's just you go back and you just, every time you open that Word document or the thing, you're just like, oh God, I hope there's something I still have to say. You just follow whatever the story is. You don't worry too much about. It was actually probably a thing I felt more about the first book, Young Skins, was like, why will anyone want to read these stories? And they're all aren't they all just kind of the same? Aren't they all just about the same kind of, you know, Egypts in a small town, you know, in Mayo? And you know, I suppose what I got from the reception of the first book is I met people from all over the world who were like, that's just like, I know the people in that story. It's just like where I grew up from. So I realized that far from being, as opposed to being a really marginal niche subject, I was actually writing completely accidentally, or, you know, inadvertently about a kind of universal experience. So you don't worry too much about all the noise around. You try not to worry too much about that stuff, because at the end of the day, you go back to a Word document or whatever, and you're just trying to get something decent out. So
Yeah, and you do forget.
You forget.
I forget.
Forgetting is great. I mean,
really
one of the best things about life is forgetting things, you know.
I think there should be more of it. How about you, Wendy? Did you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing the same thing in the sense that I'm writing about normally quite a specific place, a specific part of Belfast. I suppose at one point I got kind of a bit, not defensive exactly, but I kind of thought, you know, a lot of the time it's kind of, the sort of dialogue about it was to do with how authentically or effectively you're portraying a particular area of a place. And I ended up sounding like it really sounded daft, you know. I did an interview where I said, you know, I'm trying to write about the world's biggest themes. And unfortunately, for a while, you know, if you Googled me, it was the first thing that came up, you know. And it sounded ludicrous. And my friend contacted me, you know, he said, as soon as he saw it, he sent me a message saying, thank goodness someone's finally doing it, you know. And in all the history of literature, nobody's tried to do that before until you came along. But ultimately, that is kind of, you don't really want to say it because it makes you look such a fool, but that is what we're trying to do, that, you know, it might be incredibly particular, but, you know, the sorts of things that, you know, stories are dealing with, it's going to be like loss and death and alienation and loneliness and all those sorts of, you know, universal themes, really.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to say that you're both very funny writers and people. And I was wondering, when you're writing, is that like an intentional thing? Do you want there to be like moments of levity? Or does that just happen accidentally?
Well, I'm glad that you think I'm a funny person, because sometimes if people have found my stories funny, I sometimes think that I'm in real life a disappointment, you know, that people have said, you know, come around to our house and have thought, no, she's actually no crap. I thought she was going to be funnier than that. But yeah, for me, I kind of, I asked for there to be a William Blake epigraph for Dance Move that joy and woe are woven fine. And I also asked for Sylvester, do you want a funk? But that was too expensive. But it's just that idea that, you know, what I'm writing about a lot, I think, are quite traumatic things. There's lots of There's lots of death in this. There's, you know, there's paramilitary killings, there's suicides, there's coercion, there's all sorts of, you know, just very dreadful things that occur. But that's not all of life, and it would be foolish of me, ridiculous, and not, I think, a very satisfying read to pretend that that's all it is. And so there should also be kind of like love and tenderness, and there should also be as well humour. Now, I'm not approaching that in any schematic way. That's like, oh, right, okay, so there's been a bit of heavy stuff, we need gags, you know, for the next 2 pages. It's not like that. But it's very, for the way I want to write, the way I want to work, it's very, very necessary that there's some sort of counterbalance there. Because to me, if you're thinking about, you know, verisimilitude or whatever, you're thinking about your work reflecting real life, and it doesn't need to. People don't need to try to do that, but that's what I do want to try to do. You kind of need that. You need the spectrum of I'm sounding like that interview again. You need the spectrum of human experience, which also involves having a laugh. So, you know.
Yeah. I've written down here, I just love your characters' responses to certain situations. Here's Kate in Dance Move, the title story. Kate watches a romantic film where people compelled by passion repeatedly do rash and ridiculous things. Wouldn't have done that, she says to herself, or that, and definitely not that. The way your characters think about things is just so funny sometimes. That's like intentional or unintentional?
Yeah, well, I suppose that character Kate from Dance Move, she becomes very almost obsessed with other people moving. So she becomes kind of obsessed with dancers, with pole dancers, with ballet dancers, and with her own daughter and her friend dancing. And so all of that's sort of literal and symbolic at the same time. She doesn't feel comfortable moving, but it's as well a kind of a more metaphorical paralysis and so on. So yeah, there's all, just what I was saying, I suppose, there's all that complicated, quite sad stuff, but as well, you know, Kate's sitting watching a film and thinking at one point, maybe if I had hair like that, I would do those things, and maybe if that music was playing, I would do those things. So it's funny, but it's also really sad at the same time, because your haircut ain't gonna get you to do those things.
Oh no. How about you, Colin? How do you approach these things?
I don't think I'm funny, but I did grow up around very funny people. So, you know, I absorbed it osmotically, and it's just, I think my earliest efforts at writing when I was very young, they were very solemn, and they were attempts to be very literary. You know, as every 17-year-old or whatever wants to do, write something very very profound and sad about whatever, but they don't know about what, but like something fucking tragic, something that'll fuck people up. And you know, I only began becoming a competent writer when I just started writing about, like, not literally, but people like the people I knew, the sensibility and of people I grew up in, and the sensibility that I knew by default, the world I knew about in a sense, and or the world as filtered through their, and by extent my sensibility, and that's only when my writing became in any way alive or real, and so there was just always that strain of humor in it or whatever, but it's not something, again, you think, oh, this needs to be funnier now or whatever. Anything that happens just happens. I mean, the funniest comedy is just circumstance, like it comes out of you, if you can, you know, get a character, a particular character, and just show them in all their particularity. It's like looking at anyone. You're going to see their absurd and hilarious moments and ridiculous moments, and as you say, like complete, like, maybe if I do change my haircut, life will change for me. I know on some level that's not the way it works, but it might though. And like that's just how we all are. And so it's not something, again, I consciously think about in the writing, but I mean, it's always, I'm glad it's there. You know, I do want it to be there, but I mean, in the moment, you're just thinking of what works best for the story. And if it's something funny, it's something funny. But,
yeah. I think, what you're saying there about comedy is true, but also a lot of comedy comes from people just being stuck. Like circumstances don't really change, and that's always funny. People who are in a terrible situation. But your characters, like both of your characters, are kind of not like totally dissatisfied with their environments, but not fully kind of satisfied either, and their internal lives are usually a lot richer than what is happening kind of around them. Can I ask you about that, Colin? Wendy? Colin?
There's a collection of short stories by writer Maila Malloy, I may be saying her name wrong, Maila Malloy, called Both Ways is the Only Way I Want It. And that phrase always stuck with me from when I read that collection. And that's kind of what it's like. You know, if you're lucky enough to like your life, you're still often going to find yourself dissatisfied in some ambient way and, you know, wanting. It's just life. It's just being alive. You're always moving towards something. When you get what you want, it evaporates, as Roy Keane said, and then you move on to the next thing. As the radio DJ Chris Evans said, when you get to the top, you find there's nothing there. And
Good quotes.
he did. Yeah, that always stuck with me. That was the fellow who went out with Billy Piper, remember, about 20 years ago.
Oh, I do, yeah.
Not the guy who's Captain America, not that Chris Evans, the redhead.
Don't have to
Glasses.
explain it to me, I know.
The English man. And yeah, that's what he said. When you get to the top, there's nothing there. You know, he's the biggest DJ, biggest radio DJ in the world at the time, I think. So he'd know. And you know, so those things. So it's that thing, you know. If you're lucky enough, you might actually like a lot of your life, but it's still that restlessness and that urge never goes away. And that's what I like writing about characters and routine as well. I like writing about people who have jobs and do stuff more than think about it, and or they're so in the groove, they're so enmeshed in the grooves of their routine that they've long ago ceased thinking about it. And you can just, it's a game, not a game, but like the challenge then is to see what you can. I always find that just very appealing to write about, to try and pull something interesting out of it, rather than trying to come up with a really novel or unique or dramatic situation. I like to go into just think about them in the most mundane routine possible and see, can you work up something from that, you know?
Yeah. How about you, Wendy?
I mean, it's what you're taking care over people, Colin, and you know, being interested in people rather than plot situations or whatever. And that's the kind of thing that I like to read, and it's the kind of thing I like to write about. And I suppose a lot of the time, the characters in my stories have things going on in their minds that they're never telling anybody. And it's not necessarily because these things were deeply traumatic or that these things are in some way transgressive. It's just personal to them, things that they haven't confided to other people. And I think in a sense, everybody is unknowable. You can know someone, but you also don't really know them at all, because their inner self, their interiority, only a fraction of that is ever going to be expressed to you. And so I suppose that's what I'm trying to do, is write characters that are complex and nuanced in that way. And like another thing that really, like I really hate the word backstory, because to me backstory kind of implies that it's just some info, necessary to understand the present. And I don't really like that, because I kind of don't necessarily privilege the present over the past. I think, for some people, it's not that there's things that they can't ever get over, but the present is impinging on the past is impinging on the present to such a degree, and so that would be one of the things that I would be looking at as well, a lot. That maybe some of the most important things that have ever happened to somebody are things in the past and things that they've never told anyone.
Yeah. I want to ask you a specific question, Wendy.
Yeah, go for it.
Because just from reading the collection, I was like, your characters are either want to do a course in something, or they either are doing several courses, or they want to do a course. Like, I often think about, what is it about courses that is just like this last hope of like self-improvement or something?
Well, this is one of the great things about having a book out, that people pick up on stuff that you just don't ever notice yourself when you're writing it. So I got people I used to people bleaching things all the time. They were bleaching sinks constantly. They were bleaching their hair. I was just obsessed with the bleach. And you could think of that as symbolic in some way or not, or whatever. So people are all doing courses. I suppose it's just that idea of people wanting to transform their lives in some way, and that this is a very convenient way in which to do it. And it's like apps, it's like downloading apps that this app is going to get you fit in 30 days, it's going to get you abs in 30 days or whatever, that this is a very seductive way of transforming the self, that you have got this means of doing it, whether it's a course or an app or whatever else, but they never seem to work out for these people.
It's really put me off doing course, yeah.
What would you do a course in, Nicole?
I wanted to do one in knitting, which I wish I hadn't admit there, but I did. But I can't find one, Wendy. So.
My mother knits now. She'll sort it out.
Did she? You should have invited her.
Give you a few pointers.
I wanted to ask also about your kind of the way you write, which is with great restraint, I think. Like you write these huge kind of emotional moments, but they're often just happened, or yeah, you just kind of undercut the moment. How do you show restraint? I'd like to know.
I don't know. I suppose one of the things that I'm trying to avoid is sentimentality, and like the way I'm defining sentimentality is sort of like unearned emotion. And I'm trusting a reader, that a reader doesn't need to have it dialed up, that the reader can discern the sadness or the kind of pathos or whatever of a moment without me needing to spell it out too much, you know? So I suppose I'm always thinking, some of my first drafts would probably be way more excessive, exuberant in terms of emotion or whatever, and then I'm just trying to pare it back, because I think it can in some ways be more effective through implication rather than something stated really really overtly. But I suppose it's just sentimentality, that unearned emotion. It just feels cheap. And so that's what I'm trying to avoid. So if you thought that, that's great. That's great news.
Yeah, no, I did.
Good.
How about you, Colin? How do you do it?
Avoid sentimentality, avoid
restrained.
emotion.
Yeah.
I just get worried if I'm writing an emotional scene, like, oh, it feels like there should be an exclamation mark at the end of this sentence, and then like, oh, I think there should be an exclamation mark at the end of this next sentence, and maybe some of these words should be in all caps because they're having a very emotional moment, and then like, I have to find another way to approach that, yeah. And again, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, with a story, it's just find it interesting it's perfectly fine to have had an emotional moment happen, or it's going to happen or whatever. And I think in real life, a lot of dramatic or emotional things that happen, they happen quite, they're just like a shock to the system often, or just a period of disorientation or complete elation or despair. It's almost a physical thing. And then, if you're lucky, that whatever it is subsides, and then you're living in the aftermath of it, and then it's just, you try and put it away, or it comes back to you, depending on what it is, or you try and hold on to it. It's a good feeling. But it's always, again, you're just going to move through time, and it's going to fade and become a memory, and in most cases. And I'm trying to cover all the human condition here now. Yeah, and in general, but it's just more. Again, it's more interesting to write about not directly about the thing, to write around the thing, and not to say that these stories are puzzles or anything like that, but like, it's more fun for the reader, I think, as well, generally, to not just have everything up front, or have everything, there on the page. You have to leave the reader a space to actively engage, and so restraint, be that in your character or in the plot or in whatever, I think is just if you do it well, it's a very seductive thing for the reader. They want to read more, and they like coming to their own conclusions about character.
Do you think, Colin, you can do that more in a short story? See that idea of leaving gaps and spaces for a reader to kind of put their, fill it with their own ideas or their own thoughts or their own projections or whatever. Do you think you can do that more in a short story?
I think so. I mean, I think it's by necessity you need to, because I mean, generally you're not going to have a lot of, again, to work out full backstories or give the whole arc of a life or an event even, So you kind of are, again, it's the fun of just having limitations on a form, and like that's what's trying to write towards those limitations as opposed to trying to avoid them is, I find to be very productive. And seeing, can you pack a big punch with a small oblique story or a glance at something, and that's, that's just the fun and challenge and mystery of writing, why. I don't think about it. I just come up with if I have a scenario or a character, I just go with it, and if I'm lucky, I get a story out of the end of it. But yeah, again, you're not thinking of events. I want to tell a big dramatic story, or even the aftermath of one. I'll just see what comes out of.
So when you're starting, so if you're starting to write a story, you're starting with the character or characters initially.
Yeah.
And just letting.
Pretty much, almost, yeah. Just an image of a character doing something. Not even an inner sense, but just from the way they're sitting or the way they're doing nothing. You can get a lot from it, and then you try and communicate that to the reader. And I just build it out from there. Yeah, it's all very character centric. I mean, it's rooted in geographically, I suppose, as well, and in a very particular kind of community. But yeah, I always start with characters, with the character. Yeah.
Can I ask you, because it is so rooted in, Mayo, I think, and you wrote this collection a large amount when you were away.
Yeah,
Did you feel like your relationship to the place changed, or?
Well, I'd already been away. I was in Dublin.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
you went a bit further this time.
I was in Dublin for like 12 years before.
Yeah.
Well, I was in Dublin when I was writing the first book. Yeah. But I mean, I could get back in a few hours. Whereas now I'm in Canada, so it's a bit harder to get back at the weekends. But it just didn't change at all. It doesn't stop a thing. No, I just Someone asked me once, "What's the next book about?" I said, "More Mayo." It's like, again, as Wendy says, all of human life is there. Yeah, in the world called Mayo. Yeah, it's all there. So.
But I think that's so true. I mean, I've said about this before, but people said to me, "Do you think you'll be able to move beyond East Belfast?" And to me, that was such a strange thing, because it presupposes that people's lives are more interesting elsewhere, And I just don't think that. Maybe day to day, you've got, particular different problems if you live in parts of New York or you live wherever else. But, the actual main stuff of being a human being is going to be the same, really, wherever you are. So to me, that was a kind of an unusual take on things,
Again, it's not a limitation at all.
No, it's
I
not
just
a
always
limitation.
find myself rubbing my hands with glee when I think I've hit on another story, and invariably, or whatever it's set there, and I have written about things set elsewhere. It's not, again, it's not a contractual obligation, but it's just I just always find it freeing, when I'm I've hit. Yeah, my fear would always be, your fear anyway is just you'll run out of things to write about, full stop. But I find myself returning to the same kind of subjects and characters, and just by virtue of living and getting older and things around you changing, your attitude to that sort of stuff changes anyway. I don't have a relation to Mayo that I did when I was in my 20s or whatever. It's different now anyway, and it will be that even if I was still living in Ireland or whatever, even though I still live in Mayo. So that all changes anyway. So. And a lot of these things that might be seen as, or people can inadvertently suggest, are limitations or a boundary you need to break out of for some reason, is not that at all. It's actually a resource you can go back to, and it continuously generates, is creatively generative, and you always find more stuff to pull out of it. Yeah.
And everyone's relationship to a place is different. I think in one of your stories, Wendy, there's a cafe that someone wants to go to, and they're like, "I'm going to go to that cafe tomorrow." And you can get hung up on certain little places in a place. My life will only be good if I get to that cafe for 2 hours a week. So I think there is so much richness in writing those places. I also wanted to ask you about crime. Essentially, I think you both write not necessarily always the aftermath of maybe an act of violence or a crime, or someone maybe adjacent to something like that. Where does that come from? Colin.
I think Mayo is far more crime-ridden in my books than it actually is. But it's not. There's not no crime. I mean, things are just different out in the countryside. Definitions are more porous, and relationships are more informal and complex. In arrangements. Between people and all that sort of stuff. So, or that's the sense I got. But and that goes. It's not just a definition between legal and illegal or whatever. But it's just relationships are. There's always an informal component. There's always rules under the rules to any relationship, and in a community or wherever. And I'm sure it's the same in big cities or whatever. So. I'm just always interested in those sort of porous areas where things are, a lot of my characters they're kind of technically criminals, but they don't even think of themselves as such, or and they're not really thought of as such or whatever. So it's just a different way of being. So I'm interested in that, and exploring that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Mayo's not as crime reading now as some of my stories. But
In the first story, the shooting in Rotherdean.
Rotherdean, yeah.
So it's a guard, and she obviously it is a relationship. She knows this boy since he was kind of a man, since he was a youngster, and he's been doing low-level crime, and he just keeps like kind of reappearing in her life and stuff. And you think about that, it is a sort of like relationship. They have a strange bond.
Yeah.
If the person keeps.
There's lots of people in your life, and you may not even want them there or think much of them, but they're there.
It's true.
And so that story is kind of about what happens if that, is threatened to be taken away or threatened to collapse. How would you react or not react, as the case may be? So, yeah, I mean, it's just a function of having an identity and being somewhere, is that you are with other people, and you're with, you don't get to handpick them all, and that informs your personality, and that's. Again, I suppose it's another thing that can be imposed on you, another boundary in a sense, but it does inform who you are, for better or for worse. So, I mean, she's a guard, and so of course she's going to meet these kind of people. I mean, it's her job, but nonetheless, it's the definition of her being a guard and him being technically a criminal is in the moment in the story, it kind of blurs and changes into something else.
Yeah. And how about you, Wendy? What attracts you to crime?
Well, there's probably a higher proportion. Well, I don't know. Perhaps there's a higher proportion of crimes take place in this collection than would actually be happening in a particular part of Belfast. But I suppose a couple of the stories. Well, one of the stories particularly is to do with like a paramilitary death squad that are now all aging people, now all people in their 70s or 80s or whatever. So. I don't think it's incumbent at all upon people, from Northern Ireland, north of Ireland, to write about troubles or troubles-related issues if they don't want to. But at the same time, if people do wish to do that, I also think that's absolutely their choice. And so, sometimes that's an important aspect of somebody's life, of somebody's existence. But also, as well, just like low-level gangsterism, I would also be looking at in the stories, and also as well, I suppose, just chance, random occurrences where people just find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah. I've actually ran out of questions there, so I'm just gonna make them up as I go along. But I wanted to ask you about your how you write family dynamics, which came back to the dialogue.
Yeah.
Which is, I really think you capture how different people speak to each other in families. Particularly like brothers. For you, Colin, is that like a?
Yeah, I mean, it's just part of. Yeah, I mean, it's just a part of it, I mean, I like writing stories with like more. I like writing full stop with like. I don't want to just write about one character or one character's interiority. That's not really. I'm always interested in dynamics, social dynamics, groups, and so family's just one more. Kind of formation that's in there. With all the rest. Employee, employer, criminal, non-criminal. Older adult kid, and so. Yeah, I just love exploring those dynamics and just seeing if you can make them, even though you're writing in a short story, can you write? I mean, I think I'm often like thinking my stories are quite crowded, and there's a lot of characters relative to, like, for a 10-page story, there's 8 speaking roles or something, which is just a lot or whatever, so I'm always seeing what I can get away with, and I'm attracted to writing that way anyway. So just often when I'm kind of. Because as I said, I'll start a story with just an image or a sense of one character or something, and build it out from there. And at a certain point, you need to have some sort of a plot or story there, and generally it arrives of its own accord. But I do find it's like, okay, can I get this character talking to another character as quickly as possible? And that suddenly changes up the rhythm of the story and of the writing, So it's just one of my things I go to is, if I have a character, can I get them talking? Can I get them talking full stop? Which necessitates someone to listen, and speak back to them as quickly as possible. So yeah, that's what I don't think I really answered the question, but nonetheless, yeah.
I don't. How about you, Wendy?
Yeah, I think I agree, Colin, it's a lot of fun working like that, and getting characters talking to other characters, and I suppose we're all, a range of different people dependent on the situation. You may feel that you're like a stick of rock and there's like a kind of a core, little imprint the whole way through you, and maybe that is like that for some people, but so many people are just presenting different ideas to different people, different versions of themselves. And I have one story in that, Golem, where it's two sisters and the partners, and it was a lot of fun to write because it's one of those roving third-person consciousness, so it can just move into everybody's heads. It was just a lot of fun to do. But they all, the one sister fantasizes about her sister's husband, and then her husband, really fantasizes about the other sister's husband. So it's all mixed up. And it was kind of even just that the names they call each other are different, Marty, Martin, that even the actual signifiers of the individuals are different depending on who they're talking to,
Yeah.
So that was good. And I suppose as well, in terms of thinking about the characters, a lot of these people say things that are fairly sort of reprehensible at times, but that's kind of part of what makes them who they are. So I'm, not really trying to present paragons of virtue. So you were saying, Nicole, about like family relationships. There's two sisters, and at one point one of the sisters talks about being sexually assaulted, and the other sister's there going, right, that's all that happened. That's not that big a deal, And in so many ways, that's absolutely appalling, an appalling response. But in the context of their relationship, that was what was needed to be said in order to show how those two people interact.
Yeah.
And yet she's a lovely person to other people.
I think it comes in a family. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but I feel that you say things to my sister or whatever that I would never say to a friend.
Yeah.
Or because you can lose a friend, but you probably they'll still be around, so you can vent or whatever. I think you captured that really, really well. I'm just going to check. Do we have time for audience? Is it audience questions? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, if there's questions from the audience, is it?
I can't see anyone, so I don't know if anyone's raising their hands.
It is actually after. I just had a moment. Is it an hour and a half, the event? Or it's perhaps like 27. So if anyone has any...
No, I think we're finished. Yeah. Do some questions.
Hi, I'm just wondering, when you're writing short stories, do you usually write them in one fell swoop in just one day, or how long does it take you to write your short stories?
Good God. I think the longest one I was writing probably took a year. I mean, on and off, But yeah, no, God. No, sometimes you'll get a lot out quick. What a wonderful way to put it. Some days you sit down and you will dash something off. It'll have been brewing in your head for a long time, whatever, and it's all there, fully formed. But it's no way to write regularly, obviously, that way. You can't just go by inspiration. I certainly write my stories, very slowly and incrementally, and it's kind of, as I alluded to, I don't have, they don't come to me as plots or as like a series of events. They come to me as characters, and just intuitively thinking there might be something there with that character, and then trying to figure them out, and so yeah, it's a very slow incremental process, which I do enjoy, when it isn't driving me insane. But no, for me, and I would work on a couple of stories usually at the same time, maybe 2 or 3. And so eventually then one takes hold of you, and usually you can get that done quicker than you're in the home straight. But that still might be over. That could be over periods of weeks, if not months, And so I just rotate between them till I finish one, and then move on to the other ones. Yeah, that's how I do it anyway.
I don't always do it this way, but I normally do it this way, where I don't really put pen to paper for maybe about 3-4 weeks and just think about the characters, because it's the same thing as Colin. Mine are driven by the characters, and what I'm trying to do is just sort of get to know them. And it sounds really Mystic Meg, sort of some sort of transcendental style thing that these people are appearing to you. It feels a bit like that, even though it's not quite like that. So I take about 3 weeks or so just thinking about it, and then I write a first draft, and the first draft will be maybe 3-4 times longer than I need, so it could even be 20,000 words, maybe more, and it's a lot of fun because I just write without any restrictions whatsoever, so it just going anywhere. It could be changing character, it could be changing setting, it's just all over the place. First person, just messing it all up whatever way, and I don't really know what I'm doing at that stage, and it's that thing that Colin's saying, you're hoping intuitively that something's going to occur. And then what I do is I got that big long first draft, and then I sit and try to read it in a really cold and critical way and kind of think, well, what's going on here? Is anything going on here? Is there anything of interest here? And quite often what happens is something that was actually really peripheral, I'll be quite interested in and think that's actually where it should be. I should be having the focus. And, say, for example, the story Dance Move, the title story, I kind of started off that this was all going to be something about a mother and a daughter and kind of a jealousy or whatever. And I realized that's actually not it. That's not it at all. So then after that, go back and just start again from scratch, do it all over again. But this time it's just like turning the lens on a camera or whatever, it's just coming into focus more. And then the next time round, it should be something that's kind of sharpening up in terms of the characters and in terms of what's happening. So yeah, that's normal. I only just work on one at a time though.
No, I just want to emphasize, whenever anyone asks about this, writing is just very stop-start, very slow.
Yeah.
It's often not at all what you think it's about. As Wendy says, it's about another thing entirely.
Yeah.
And it's all just, it is, at least it's certainly that way for me, sounds like for you. So
totally.
It really is just an act of will to just want to go back. It's not that it flows or that it gets easier as it goes on, but it is just something you want to do and keep going back to. And as you say, when you're lucky a character's nagging at you, there's something there. You maybe don't know quite what it is, but there's something there. And so, having going to a story and then leaving it for a while, or that's what I would do rather than wait weeks as you do to start. But I would get something down, but then it would stick with me. I might look at it again for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, but I'll go back and there'll be something there, So you trust in your unconscious to work a lot of it out for you as well. You're just waiting for the signal.
That's it. I think that's us 100% it. That you are trusting your mind, you're trusting your unconscious that it's going to throw up things, and that it's going to make links that consciously you just are not working on whatsoever. It's cool. Whenever you can see that happening, it's really exciting. But sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes I'll read that long first draft and just think, there's nothing here. It's interesting.
So it's hit and miss. You just have to keep at it.
Yeah, just keep at it.
Yeah, there's very little conscious thought into it, really.
Yeah.
As mystic as that sounds. But they're really, you're like, I'm a really bad formal thinker, I'm a really bad systemic thinker, I'm a really bad thinker, full stop. But I am just sitting there and I can wait. So that's my
but can you imagine,
ability.
Imagine your story and you go, okay, so the ingredients are this sort of character, that sort of character, this sort of character. I'm going to have this symbolism, that sort of metaphor, and I'm going to have this. It would be a disaster.
For me, anyway, I know people who do plan a lot of stuff before they write and want to have overt series of themes. So it is different for everyone. Jesus, if it works the other way for you, great, fantastic. I know people who just hammer through first drafts without thinking about it at all, without any kind of weight. But certainly for me, I don't mind going back and I don't mind being patient with it, So.
I think we have to finish up. That's my fault because I lost track of time. But if you want to learn more about Colin and Wendy, you can buy their books, which I would recommend. And they were great. Well done.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.